I was 18 when it happened. It was my high school graduation night, a night that was supposed to be full of excitement, nostalgia, and relief. I was finally done with high school, no more early mornings, no more pointless homework, no more dealing with teachers who had it out for me. I was ready to move on, ready to start the next chapter of my life. The ceremony was set to take place in the school gym, just like it had for generations of students before us. Before heading inside, a few of my friends and I were hanging out in the school courtyard, dressed in our caps and gowns, taking pictures and joking around. The air buzzed with laughter and energy, the kind that only comes with the anticipation of something big. That's when I saw him. A man, probably in his late 30s, standing just outside the gates. He wasn't dressed for the occasion. No suit, no tie, just a plain hoodie and jeans. I recognized him instantly. Not because I knew him personally, but because I had seen him before. More than once. At first, I couldn't place where, but there was something about him, his posture, the way he held himself, the way his eyes seemed to scan the crowd, that set off an alarm in my head. Then it hit me. I had seen him around town a few times, lurking near the school, standing outside convenience stores, sitting alone in coffee shops, always looking like he was waiting for something, or someone. And now, he was here. He made eye contact with me and started walking toward me. "Hey, man," I greeted him cautiously. "What's up?" He smiled, but there was something off about it. Too wide. Too forced. "Just wanted to watch the ceremony," he said, his voice smooth, almost friendly. "Big night for you guys. Thought I'd stop by and congratulate you." I nodded slowly. "Huh, thanks." He stood there for a second, like he was waiting for something. Then he gave me this look, a weird, lingering stare, followed by an unsettling grin. Then he turned and walked away. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he was just some guy who lived nearby, someone who enjoyed watching the excitement of graduation night. Maybe I was being paranoid. But the unease settled in my stomach like a rock. We went inside the gym, the ceremony beginning with the usual speeches and formalities. The principal droned on about hard work, perseverance, and the bright futures ahead of us. The band played the graduation march. Everything was going as expected, until my friend James leaned over and whispered, "Dude, I think I know that guy." I glanced at him. "The one outside?" James nodded, his face pale. "I heard about him." A chill ran down my spine. "He's a creep, isn't he?" James swallowed hard. "Worse than that. People say he follows kids around, watches them. And there's more, but we should talk after." I didn't press for details. Not yet. I kept my eyes forward, but the whole time, I felt on edge. When the ceremony ended, we tossed our caps, cheered, and made our way outside to take pictures with friends and family. I had almost managed to push the guy from my mind. Almost. Until I saw him again. He was standing near the gym doors, watching. Not talking to anyone. Not taking pictures. Just watching. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. James and I exchanged a glance. We both knew we had to warn the others. We made our way through the crowd, quietly telling our friends what James had heard. Every single person we told reacted the same way, eyes widening, faces tightening with unease. Then, as if sensing the attention on him, the man walked toward us. "Congratulations, guys," he said, his voice just as smooth as before. We all mumbled our thanks, keeping our expressions neutral, trying not to show how creeped out we were. His smile never faltered, but his eyes, they weren't right. There was something hungry in them. Something wrong. Then he just turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. We didn't waste any time. There was a police officer stationed near the school entrance for crowd control. We approached him and told him everything about the man, about how we had seen him before, about the rumors James had heard. The officer's expression darkened. Apparently, we weren't the first to mention him. There have been complaints about him, the officer admitted. Harassing people, following them, more than once. A chill settled in my bones. The officer radioed for backup, then walked toward the parking lot, scanning the area. And then, just as quickly as he had disappeared, the man reappeared. He was near the edge of the parking lot, standing completely still, watching. The officer called out to him. The man turned. His smile was gone now, and for the first time, I saw something else on his face. Anger. It was subtle, but it was there, in the tightness of his jaw, the way his hands clenched into fists at his sides. For a moment, he didn't move. Then, without a word, he turned and started walking away. The officer followed. Within minutes, more police cars pulled up, red and blue lights flashing in the night. The officers approached the man, speaking to him. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw his body language shift. Then, suddenly, they were handcuffing him. James and I watched, breathless, as they led him toward one of the squad cars. As they passed us, he turned his head just enough to look at us. His eyes locked onto mine, and he smirked. A slow, deliberate smirk that sent a bolt of ice down my spine. Like he was memorizing my face. Like this wasn't over. Then they shoved him into the back seat and slammed the door shut. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The cops drove away. The night moved on. Our friends laughed, took more pictures, talked about the future. But I couldn't shake the feeling. That look, that smirk, that unspoken promise. We never saw him again after that. But sometimes, even now, I wonder, how many other graduations had he been to? How many times had he stood in the shadows, watching? And how many times had he not been caught? When I was a freshman in high school, Alyssa was my role model. She was a senior, confident, effortlessly stylish, and always the center of attention. She had this presence about her, like she belonged in the spotlight. Every hallway she walked down, people turned their heads. Teachers adored her, guys wanted to date her, and girls wanted to be her. I was none of those things. I was the quiet girl who blended into the background. The one who made decent grades, had a small circle of friends, and kept her head down. I wasn't shy, exactly, but I wasn't the type of person who drew attention. That's why, when my senior year rolled around, I never expected anyone to look at me the way I once looked at Alyssa. But then the notes started. The first one appeared in my locker sometime during the second month of school. A small, folded-up piece of paper tucked neatly between my books. "You look beautiful in that dress on Friday. Red heart." I remember staring at it for a long moment, feeling a rush of surprise. The handwriting was neat, simple, with a little heart at the end. I looked around the hallway, scanning for anyone who might be watching, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Just the usual chaos of students shoving books into lockers, chatting with friends, rushing to class. It was flattering. I had never had a secret admirer before. More notes followed. "Your smile lights up the hallway. You shine brighter than any star. Your homecoming photos look like something out of a magazine." Stunning. They were never over the top or inappropriate. Just little compliments, sweet and thoughtful. They made me feel seen. I started looking forward to them, even though I had no idea who was leaving them. Whoever it was, they always placed them in my locker during fourth period. I knew this because I checked before class and again after. The notes always arrived in that window of time. I tried to figure out who it might be. Maybe a shy underclassman with a crush? Maybe someone in one of my classes who didn't have the courage to speak to me directly? I didn't tell anyone about them. I didn't want my friends turning it into a big deal, running an investigation, embarrassing whoever was behind it. And besides, whoever was leaving the notes, I truly believed they meant well. That belief lasted until my second semester. My schedule changed after winter break, and my last class of the day moved to a room upstairs, near my friend Melissa's locker. Since her last class was now near mine, we decided to swap lockers. It just made things easier. I forgot about the notes for a while. Then, on my 18th birthday, Melissa handed me a folded-up piece of paper. "Happy birthday, princess. Red heart." She laughed. "Guess your secret admirer didn't get the memo about the locker swap." At first, she thought the notes were meant for her, until she realized the birthday message didn't match up. That's when she put it together. When I told her about the notes, she got that look in her eye, the one that meant she was about to go full detective mode. And that's exactly what she did. Melissa and our other friends made it their mission to figure out who was behind them. One of our friends, Sarah, didn't have a fourth period class, so she stationed herself near the lockers, pretending to study while keeping an eye on mine. It didn't take long. The next day, she saw someone slip the note inside, and it wasn't who we expected. It wasn't a shy freshman. It wasn't a secret admirer. It was a janitor, an older woman, maybe in her late 40s or early 50s. Someone none of us had ever really paid attention to before. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. She had been watching me, for months, close enough to comment on my outfits, my homecoming photos, even the dress I wore on specific days. And I had never noticed. I had never seen her watching, never once suspected. A memory flashed through my mind. The last field hockey game of the season. I had spotted her sitting in the stands, alone. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. Now, I realized she wasn't there for the game. She was there for me. We debated what to do. Should we report her? Confront her? But she hadn't really done anything. She never tried to touch me. Never said anything inappropriate. All she did was write notes. Creepy, yes. Unsettling, absolutely. But technically not a crime. So we didn't say anything. We just stopped checking the locker. We ignored the notes, left them unopened. Eventually, they stopped. I never spoke to her. She never spoke to me. But for the rest of the year, whenever I walked down the hallway, I felt her eyes on me. And I couldn't help but wonder, how much had she really seen? How much did she really know? And worst of all, why me? I never thought I'd experience true fear at school. Sure, I had the usual anxieties, exams, presentations, the occasional hallway confrontation with a kid who thought they were tougher than they actually were. But real, bone-deep terror? The kind that sticks with you, that leaves you staring at your ceiling at night, reliving every moment in vivid detail? That was something I had only seen in movies. Until the lockdown. It started as just another normal morning. I got to school around 7:45, walking through the halls with my headphones in, nodding along to my playlist as I weaved through groups of students. The halls were loud, chaotic as always, kids chatting about last night's football game, complaining about homework, laughing at whatever drama had unfolded over the weekend. I found my usual spot near my locker, where my friends were already gathered. James was leaning against the wall, scrolling through his phone, while Claire and Ethan argued over whether the math test today was going to be easy or impossible. I laughed, shoving my backpack into my locker. You guys stress too much. Just wing it. Claire shot me a glare. Not all of us have a death wish, Ryan. The morning was routine, familiar. Just another day. Then the first period bell rang, and we all scattered to class. That was the last moment of normalcy we had. I had barely sat down in my seat when the electronic board at the front of the classroom flickered, then froze. A single message in bold red text appeared across the screen. Lockdown in effect. Proceed to safe locations immediately. For a second, no one moved. Then the whisper started. Is this another drill? What's going on? No way they're doing a drill first thing in the morning. My teacher, Mr. Howard, frowned, walking over to his desk and grabbing the class roster. He flipped through the pages, his forehead creased with confusion. The air in the room felt heavier. It was Ethan, sitting behind me, who checked his phone first. His face went pale. Dude, he muttered, eyes wide. Someone just got stabbed. The room fell silent. I turned in my seat to look at him. What? Ethan swallowed hard, still staring at his screen. Near the cafeteria. Someone just texted me. There was a fight, and one of the guys had a knife. My stomach twisted. This wasn't a drill. Mr. Howard's expression darkened. All right, everyone stay calm. Away from the windows. Move to the back of the room. We hesitated for just a second, then scrambled out of our seats. Desks screeched against the floor as we rushed toward the back wall, some kids crouching behind bookshelves, others pressing themselves against the cool tile floor. I took out my phone, my hand shaking as I pulled up my group chat. Ryan, where are you guys? James, Jim, what the hell is going on? Claire, library. We're locked in. Ethan, we're in Howard's room. Doors locked. Then, from somewhere in the distance, a scream. Loud. Sharp. A sound that made my blood run cold. Then footsteps. Not normal, casual footsteps, but running. Fast. Urgent. And then, just outside our door, a loud bang. It sounded like someone had slammed into the lockers, hard. The whole room tensed, everyone holding their breath, frozen. Then, the doorknob rattled. Not a quick jiggle, not a casual attempt to open the door. It was frantic. Desperate. Someone was trying to get in. A few students near the door shrank back, their eyes wide with terror. Mr. Howard slowly raised a hand, motioning for us to stay quiet. The rattling stopped. Silence. For what felt like an eternity, no one moved. Then, a voice. Police. Open up. No one reacted. Mr. Howard hesitated, his jaw tight. I could see the debate in his eyes. Was it really the police, or was it someone trying to lure us out? Then another voice, louder this time. Police. It's safe to come out. Still, we didn't move. Then, suddenly, the doors swung open. A police officer stood there, one hand on his holster, scanning the room. Behind him, two more officers moved cautiously through the hall. Everyone okay? He asked. Mr. Howard nodded. Yeah. What's going on? The officer sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. We've got the suspect in custody. It's safe now, but we need to move all students to the gym. Walking through the halls felt surreal. There were bloodstains on the floor near the cafeteria. Not a lot, but enough. Enough to make my stomach churn. Enough to remind me that, for a few terrifying minutes, someone had been out here with a weapon. Someone who had planned this. When we got to the gym, the bleachers were already packed. Hundreds of students sat in tense clusters, whispering in hushed voices. Teachers paced along the walls, trying to maintain some kind of order. We sat there for hours, waiting. No one told us anything. By the time we were finally allowed to leave, the rumors had spread. Here's what we found out later. The fight had started near the cafeteria. Two guys, both seniors, arguing over a girl. One of them had been dating her, but apparently, she had been seeing both of them at the same time. When the other guy found out, he lost it. He had come to school prepared. He brought a knife. And when the argument escalated, he used it. One stab to the side, quick and violent. Then he ran. He had a plan. A car was waiting for him outside, his getaway. Two other students were involved, helping him escape. They had arranged everything beforehand, but they didn't get far. The police had the school locked down within minutes. They caught him before he could leave the parking lot. The victim survived. He was rushed to the hospital and underwent surgery. The attacker was arrested, along with his two accomplices. Days later, people were still talking about it. In the cafeteria, I overheard someone talking about how they had been near the fight when it happened. I was walking to class when some guy bumped into me, he said, his voice low. I thought he was just messing around, but when I looked down, there was blood all over his hands. Another student added, I was heading toward the cafeteria when I heard the teachers yelling. I ran, but there was this pregnant teacher in front of me. She tripped, and I fell with her. I just got up and ran because I was so scared. No one was the same after that. We tried to act normal, like it was just another thing that happened, but it wasn't. It stuck with us. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I still hear that scream. I was 15 when I first noticed something strange about Mr. Conroy. At first, he seemed like any other teacher. He was in his early 40s, average height, thinning brown hair that he always ran his fingers through when he was annoyed. He wore the same dull-colored dress shirts every day, and his monotone voice could put even the most energetic students to sleep. He wasn't a bad teacher, just forgettable. The kind of guy who'd probably spent too many years grading physics tests and not enough time actually engaging with students. That's why I didn't notice anything at first. Not until the staring started. It was subtle in the beginning. A glance here, a quick look there. I assumed he was just scanning the classroom while lecturing, maybe making sure people were paying attention. But then, I started realizing something. He wasn't just looking around. He was looking at me. The first time I caught him, I was doodling in the margins of my notebook while he talked about velocity or friction or something else I didn't care about. When I glanced up, his eyes were already locked on me. I froze. It wasn't just a fleeting look, either. He wasn't checking to see if I was paying attention. He was staring. His expression was blank, his face completely still, like he wasn't even aware he was doing it. Then, just as suddenly, he looked away and continued teaching as if nothing had happened. It was weird, but I brushed it off. Until it happened again. And again. And again. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining it. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe he was zoning out and I just happened to be in his line of sight. But then, Riley noticed. We were packing up our stuff after class when she leaned over and whispered, "Is it just me? Or does Mr. Conroy stare at you a lot?" A chill ran down my spine. I forced a laugh. Maybe I remind him of his long-lost daughter. Riley didn't laugh. "I'm serious," she said. "It's creepy. He doesn't do that to anyone else." I shrugged, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling in my gut. It's probably nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Because after that, it got worse. I'd walk through the halls between classes and feel eyes on me, only to turn and see Mr. Conroy standing near his classroom door, watching as I passed. At lunch, I'd look across the cafeteria and spot him sitting alone at one of the staff tables, not eating, not talking to the other teachers, just staring. It made my skin crawl. And then, one day, something happened that I couldn't ignore. It was after school, and I had stayed late to work on a group project in the library. By the time we finished, most of the school was empty. The usual chatter of students replaced with an eerie silence. I told my friends I'd meet them outside after grabbing my things from my locker. The hallways felt different when they were empty. The flickering overhead lights cast strange shadows, and every small noise echoed, making it sound like someone was always just around the corner. I walked quickly, trying to shake the growing unease in my chest. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not casual, aimless footsteps, deliberate ones. I glanced over my shoulder. No one. I swallowed hard and kept walking, my pace quickening. The footsteps quickened, too. I turned the corner and froze. Mr. Conroy was standing at the end of the hall. His hands were in his pockets, his expression unreadable. You shouldn't be out here alone. His voice was calm. Too calm. I forced a nervous laugh. I was just heading out. He tilted his head slightly. Let me walk you. My stomach twisted. No, that's okay. My friends are waiting for me. He took a step forward. It's not safe this late, he said. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. My feet felt rooted to the floor. Another step. Really, I'm fine, I said quickly, forcing my voice to stay steady. I'll just... Then from behind me. Hey, are you coming, or what? I turned so fast I nearly lost my balance. Riley. She was standing at the other end of the hallway, looking at me impatiently. I had never been so relieved to see her in my life. Mr. Conroy didn't move for a second. Then, slowly, he forced a tight-lipped smile. Don't stay too late, he said. And just like that, he turned and walked away. I felt like I could breathe again. Riley frowned as I hurried over to her. What was that about? I shook my head, my hands shaking. I don't know, but I think something's wrong with him. We left the building quickly, stepping out into the fresh air. But even as I climbed into my mom's car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just narrowly escaped something. The next morning, I went to the counselor's office. I didn't accuse him of anything outright. I didn't have proof, after all, but I told them I was uncomfortable, that I wanted to be transferred to a different class. The counselor nodded sympathetically, taking notes. I left feeling relieved. Like maybe, finally, it was over. It wasn't. Because the next week, Mr. Conroy was gone. No announcement. No explanation. He just disappeared. When students asked about him, the school was vague. He had to leave for personal reasons. That was it. No further details. Most people forgot about him within a few weeks. But I never did. Because a few months later, I saw something that made my blood run cold. I was scrolling through my phone when I stumbled across a local news article. Man arrested in neighboring town for alleged misconduct with minors. My breath caught in my throat. The mugshot loaded. Mr. Conroy. The article detailed accusations spanning years, from multiple schools, students who had come forward long after he had left. Some had stories eerily similar to mine. Feeling watched, followed, hunted. I felt sick. I had been so close to becoming another one of his victims. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear his voice echoing in my head. You shouldn't be out here alone. I wonder now, was that a warning? Or a threat? And more importantly, how many times had he said it to someone who didn't get away? I was 15 when Jake decided to make me his target. At first, he was just another face in the crowded hallways of my high school. I didn't know him. I didn't have any classes with him. As far as I knew, we had never even spoken. He was older, probably a junior or senior, with dark eyes that always seemed a little too sharp, a little too intense. But then, one day, I noticed something strange. He was staring at me, not in a casual way, not in the way people glance at each other in the halls or make accidental eye contact across a room. No, Jake's gaze was different, cold, focused, unwavering. It started small, a few glances here and there, a lingering stare when I passed him in the hallway. Then, one day, he glared at me outright. I had just stepped out of the bathroom, flipping my hair over my shoulder as I adjusted my backpack strap. When I looked up, he was there, standing by the lockers, his arms crossed, his expression twisted in something that looked like disgust. I frowned, confused. Had I done something to him? We had never spoken before. But then he stepped forward. You think you're funny? I blinked, caught off guard. What? His jaw clenched. You flipped me off. I stared at him, stunned. No, I didn't. Don't lie to me. His voice was low, sharp, like a blade slicing through the noise of the hallway. I saw you. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't done anything. I hadn't even seen him before that moment. Before I could protest again, he turned and stalked away, shoving past a group of freshmen. It was weird, unsettling, but I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. The next time I saw him, he was waiting outside my classroom. At first, I thought he was just passing through, but when I stepped into the hallway, he didn't move. He just stood there, arms crossed, staring at me. When I walked past him, his eyes followed me. When I glanced back over my shoulder, he was still watching. After that, I started seeing him everywhere. Near my locker, by the cafeteria, in the gym, standing off to the side, barely blending in with the crowd. It didn't feel like a coincidence, but I didn't say anything. Not yet. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I was being paranoid. But then, something happened that made me realize I wasn't. One afternoon, I was getting off the bus when I spotted a familiar car parked near the curb. Jake was sitting behind the wheel. He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't waiting for a friend, wasn't looking at his phone, wasn't even pretending to be there for some other reason. He was just watching. I hurried inside without looking back. For the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes on me. Then came the worst day. I was late to class because I had a meeting with the headmaster. By the time I finally made my way back down to the first floor, the halls were empty, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I turned a corner and froze. Jake was standing in the middle of the hallway. His eyes locked onto mine immediately, his posture rigid. My stomach twisted. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around and run. But I didn't. Instead, I forced my voice to stay steady. "What do you want?" His lips curled into a smirk. "You know what?" I took a step back. He stepped forward. My heart pounded. The corridor was empty. No witnesses. No teachers. No way to call for help. I turned on my heel and started walking fast. So did he. I tried to stay calm. If I could just get to my classroom, if I could just reach the woodworking hallway, where I knew my teacher would be. Then he lunged. I barely had time to react before he grabbed my wrist, yanking me back toward him. I twisted, trying to rip my arm free, but his grip was like iron. "Hey." I jerked hard, using his own momentum against him, and bolted toward the nearest doorway. The girls' bathroom. I ran inside, breathless. But he followed me in. For a split second, the world seemed to slow. I spun around, my back pressed against the cold-tiled wall. Jake stood in front of me, chest heaving, his dark eyes burning with something I couldn't quite name. His mouth twisted into a sick grin. "You think you can just ignore me?" A fresh wave of fear rolled through me. I felt trapped. He took a step forward. Then, a noise. A sudden clatter from behind him. Then a voice. "Hey, is everything okay?" Jake's head snapped toward the entrance. A janitor. She was standing just outside the bathroom, frowning, her hands on her hips. Jake's whole body tensed. For a second, he didn't move. Then, without a word, he turned and bolted out of the bathroom, disappearing down the hall. I stayed frozen, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the janitor when she asked if I was all right. I nodded numbly, but I wasn't. I didn't feel all right. I felt sick. I felt violated. And worst of all, I felt watched. Because even though Jake never confronted me again after that day, he still watched. From across the cafeteria, from the far end of the hallway, always just close enough for me to see him, always making sure I knew he was there. Then, one day, he was gone. He graduated before I did. I never saw him again after that. But sometimes, even now, when I'm walking alone at night, I still get that feeling. That gut-wrenching, skin-crawling feeling. Like I'm being watched. I never thought much about Mr. Dwyer when I was in high school. He was just another teacher. Middle-aged, balding, always wearing the same brown dress shoes that clicked against the tile floor as he walked. He taught biology and had been at the school for over a decade. He wasn't particularly strict or particularly fun, just an average teacher, the kind you barely remember after you graduate. That's why it shocked me years later when I saw his face on the news. But I'll get to that. Back when I was a student, I didn't have any personal issues with him. If anything, he was one of the few teachers who seemed to care. I was going through a rough time my sophomore year. My parents were fighting constantly, and my grades were slipping. I had always been an A student, but suddenly, I found myself struggling to focus, missing assignments, zoning out in class. Mr. Dwyer noticed. One afternoon, he pulled me aside after class. "You okay?" he asked, his voice calm but concerned. I hesitated. "Yeah, just a lot going on at home." He nodded, as if he understood. "If you ever need someone to talk to, my door's always open." It was a nice gesture. Most teachers didn't bother checking in on students like that. At the time, I appreciated it. But looking back, maybe I should have been more cautious. Because as the months passed, Mr. Dwyer started paying more attention to me. At first, it was subtle. He'd ask how I was doing more often, stop me in the hallway to chat, offer to help me with assignments after school. It didn't seem weird. I figured he was just being a supportive teacher. But then, little things started adding up. I'd be walking down the hall and feel someone watching me. I'd glance back and see Mr. Dwyer standing near his classroom door, his eyes following me as I passed. Once, I caught him looking at me through the window of the cafeteria while I ate lunch. He didn't wave or smile. He just watched for a few moments before walking away. Then there were the compliments. "You have a very mature way of thinking for your age. You're wise beyond your years. You're going to be an incredible woman someday." Harmless, right? Maybe even flattering. Except it never felt like he said those things to other students. Just me. I told myself I was imagining things. That he was just a caring teacher who wanted to make sure I was okay. But then something happened that I couldn't ignore. It was late in the afternoon, and I had stayed after school for a biology club meeting. Most of the students had already left, and I was gathering my things when Mr. Dwyer approached me. "Need a ride home?" he asked. I blinked. "What? It's getting late. I don't mind driving you." I hesitated. Something about the offer made my stomach twist. "No, thanks," I said quickly. "I'm walking." He smiled, but there was something off about it. "Be careful out there," he said. "Lots of weirdos in this town." I nodded, forcing a laugh, and walked out of the classroom as fast as I could. I didn't think much of it after that. Maybe he was just being polite. But then, about a week later, I was walking home after another late meeting when I got the feeling that someone was following me. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid. But then I heard it. The low hum of a car engine creeping along the curb. I turned my head. A car was driving slowly behind me. A dark blue sedan. Mr. Dwyer's car. My heart started pounding. I picked up my pace. The car kept following. Not fast, not aggressive, just there. Watching. I turned a corner. The car turned too. I could see the driver's silhouette through the windshield. I didn't want to believe it was him. I told myself I was imagining things. That maybe he lived nearby. That maybe he just happened to be driving the same way. Then the car pulled over. A window rolled down, and his voice called out, "Need a ride?" I didn't answer. I just ran. I didn't stop running until I got home, my lungs burning, my heart slamming against my ribs. I locked the door behind me and peered through the blinds. The car was gone. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. I didn't have proof. I didn't know for sure if it meant anything. But after that, I avoided Mr. Dwyer as much as possible. I never stayed after school again. Never walked home alone. Eventually, he seemed to lose interest. By senior year, I barely saw him. He taught mostly freshman and sophomore classes, so I no longer had any reason to interact with him. By the time I graduated, he was just a distant, unsettling memory. Then, years later, I saw his face on the news. It was a mugshot. The headline made my stomach drop. Local biology teacher arrested in international child exploitation sting. I clicked the article, my hands shaking. The details were horrifying. Multiple victims. Years of abuse. Evidence found on his computer. The man I had once trusted. The man who had checked in on me. Who had told me I was wise beyond my years. Who had followed me in his car, had been hiding a dark secret all along. I sat there, staring at the screen, my pulse racing. Had I been one of his almost victims? Had he been testing me, waiting for the right moment? Or had I just gotten lucky? I never told anyone about what happened between us. But sometimes, late at night, I lie awake wondering, what would have happened if I had gotten in that car?